Hello YouTube and welcome to the next route learning video. On today's video we're going to be revisiting the USA and I'm going to be driving a journey along the diesel only section of the North Jersey coastline between Bayhead and Long Branch, which is a distance of just under 16 miles. Along the way we will be calling at Point Pleasant, Manasquan, Spring Lake, Belmar, Bradley Beach, Asbury Park, Allenhurst, Elberon and finally Long Branch. The scenario that I'm using for this video is one which I found on Steam Workshop called NJT Morning Shuttle. The locomotive which is hauling our train today is an ALP-45 DP Electro-Diesel locomotive. The ALP-45s were built by Bombardier Transportation between 2010 and 2012, with a total of 46 of these locomotives produced. The length of each locomotive is 71.5 feet, with a weight of 130.6 tons. They are dual power electro-diesel locomotives, which means that they do have a pantograph and so can run in electric mode, but they also have a diesel engine so that they can run where there is no overhead electrification. The maximum speed of the locomotive is 100 miles per hour in diesel mode and 125 miles per hour in electric mode. The power output of the locomotives is 5,900 horsepower in electric mode and 3,600 horsepower in diesel mode. Once in the cab of the locomotive, the first thing that I'm going to do is put the reversing handle into the forward position, and so you can see the handle there which has just moved now, and so the locomotive is now in forward. And now that I've done that, let's just have a quick look at some of the controls in the cab to show you what the various controls are. So over here you can see that we have several switches for the headlights, cab lights and instrument lights. I'm just going to click on the instrument light switch now. You may have noticed that the headlights were already on when you saw the outside shots of the train. And indeed when I started the scenario the headlights were already defaulted to the on position. Now the handle in front of us here is the horn control, which I will just demonstrate now. Now just to the right of that down here we have the combined power handle. So what this is, it's got the throttle on it, but it's also got control of the dynamic brakes, and we will need to use the dynamic brakes on this journey due to the way that the train's air brake system works. So if you were to pull the throttle towards you, or should I say pull the handle towards you, you would be operating the throttle, and you can see there that there are 9 positions before F, which means full for full power, and so there are actually in total 10 positions on the throttle. If you then move the handle away from 0 and push it away from you, you're then activating the dynamic brake, and the higher the number, then the harder the dynamic brakes are applied. However, I must point out that you can't actually completely stop a train with a dynamic brake, as due to the nature of the way the braking system works, it actually requires the train to be moving for it to be effective. Now if we continue to go around the cab here, you can see in front of us now we have the speedometer, and the various numbers on the outside of the speedometer indicate different signal aspects. So when you pass certain signals you may encounter speed limits, though I don't think we will do on this journey today, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on how the signalling here works. Just down here you can see we've got a few more buttons, including the pantograph control, the handbrake control and of course the bell. I've just demonstrated the bell there. I'm not actually sure what the rules on horn and bell usage are on this route, simply because there are absolutely no whistle boards whatsoever. In addition to that, there are also no speed limit boards on this route, so I've got to actually know where the speed limits are going to start and end by landmarks, rather than any direct reference which you can see out of the cab window. Now if we look over to the right hand side here for the final controls that we're going to be looking at, the control on the right hand side, which is the black handle, is the independent or locomotive brake, which controls the brakes only on the locomotive itself, whereas the handle which has got the red top to it is the train brake. Now the brakes on this locomotive, unusually for a modern train, are not, I think the phrase is, self-lapping, and indeed you have to manually lap the brakes. So if I demonstrate here now, if I just move it all the way to the release position, and now if we want to make a brake application, if I now move it up, I've actually got to move it all the way up to the service position before the brakes start applying. You can now see in the brake gauges there, with the gauge on the right particularly, the red needle was climbing, and in fact it's just above 30 now. So if I now move the brakes to the release position again, I'll just demonstrate exactly what's happening. So when you want to make a brake application, you judge how hard the brakes are applied by the position of the red needle, the brake cylinder pressure gauge. If I now wanted to say make a brake application to 20 with that needle, I'll then move it to the service position and then move the brake handle back to the lap position to hold the brakes at that particular brake pressure. If you then want to reduce the brake pressure, you have to fully release the brakes and then reapply them once again. I must point out, however, that if you keep doing this, you will actually have problems applying the brakes in the future. So if I now do this and I just move it back to the service position again, and now do a full brake release, now I'm going to move the handle back to the service position once again, you'll see that the red needle won't actually climb very far at all, and so we get a very minimal brake application. I'm not quite sure why that is. I think it's something to do with bleeding the air from the brakes or something like that. So when stopping at stations, you've got to be very careful with fanning the brakes. And this is why it's important to use the dynamic braking system in conjunction with this braking system, so that you can slow down quicker using a low air brake application. Now that we've gone through the controls at the cab, I'm just going to quickly pan to another shot of the outside of the train before we head into Bayhead station, as we are currently parked in the siding. Departing from the siding here, we've got around 1/5 of a mile to go to Bayhead station itself, and the current speed limit is 5 miles per hour. So as we get to 5 miles per hour, I'm going to shut off the power and allow the train to coast until our speed falls below 4 miles per hour. And then at that point, I'm just going to go back into notch 1 on the throttle, just to bring our speed back up to 5 once again. The speed limit will be going up further to 10 miles per hour just as we enter the platform at Bayhead. However, there's very little point in accelerating towards that, as we will very shortly after the increase need to make our stop at the station. So I'm still at this point just going between idle and notch 1 to try and maintain the speed. 5 miles per hour is quite a difficult speed to maintain, rather ironically, just because you can't keep it at a constant speed. You're either speeding up or slowing down with the power settings. I would just like to take this opportunity to apologise for it being so long between this video and my previous video, which I believe was just over 3 weeks ago. It's just that I've been really busy with university assignments. Indeed, I had 4 assignments due all within the space of a week of each other, so that really has kept me busy. I finally managed to get the final assignment finished today. The deadline was 4 PM and I managed to finish it at 2:30. I have this terrible habit of leaving things until the last minute, though it seems to be that the pressure I find actually helps me to get more work done than if I don't have the pressure there. As we approach this crossing, you can see the platform coming up just ahead, so I have now turned on the bell because I believe it is correct procedure to have the bell sounding when you enter a platform. At this point, the rear of the train should have cleared the point in the yard, which means that the speed limit has now gone up to 10 miles per hour. And as you can see, there really is no point in accelerating here. What I'm aiming to do for the stopping point, because I do need to stop with the loco beyond the end of the platform due to the length of the train, is I'm going to aim to stop with the signal which you can see on the opposite track, roughly on the wiper in the driver's window. So I'm now making a very light brake application just to bring our speed down, and we should now be stopped in about the right place. Departing Bayhead, the starting speed limit is 10 miles per hour, and we've got just over a mile to go to the next stop, which is Point Pleasant. So I'm just using a low to medium power setting to bring us up towards 10 miles per hour, and as we get to 10, I'm then going to shut off the power to allow the train to coast, so I'm just pulling the power back now towards idle. As you can see, we're now doing 10 miles per hour, and so at this point I've now shut off the power to allow the train to coast. The speed limit is going up to 40 miles per hour at this crossing you can see just coming up. That is actually where the speed board should be located, but as you'll be able to see here, there is no speed board at all. I can be sure that the rear of the train has cleared the speed board as I get just a bit further along. As we get towards a house on the right hand side, I'm going to accelerate towards 40 miles per hour just before we reach that house. As we've now dropped to 8 miles per hour, I've just gone back up to notch 1 of power to bring us back up towards 10 once again. You can now see the house coming on the right hand side, and you can see that there is also a gate there, so just around the area of that gate is when I believe the rear of the train should have cleared the speed board, or should I say the invisible speed board, and we should be able to accelerate up towards 40. I say gate, it actually looks more like a fence than a gate, so yes, it's this fence just here. So now I'm just gradually increasing the power up towards full so that we can accelerate up towards 40 miles per hour. I must say that having driven this section of the route a few times now, I actually really like it. I think that it's a really scenic section of the route, though I actually quite like this whole add-on. It's quickly becoming one of my favourite American add-ons. And you can certainly expect to see more videos on this in the future, so that ultimately I will end up covering the entire route. What I'm looking out for along here now is 3 level crossings which are actually very close to each other, and at the 3rd crossing, that's roughly the point where I want to consider braking for our next stop. As you can see here, I have now just idled the power, and we've just reached, I believe this is the 3rd crossing here. We just crossed the first 2 close crossings which I mentioned, and so now at this point I'm now starting with applying the dynamic brakes. So I've now got the dynamic brakes in full, and I'm going to use the air brakes as we get closer to the station to ensure that we slow down in time. As we get closer to the end of the platform, I'm now going to reduce the dynamic braking and put the power handle into the idle position so that we stop using only the air brakes here. In fact, it looks like we're going to stop slightly too early, though very much like at Bayhead station, the platform isn't long enough to accommodate the whole train, so I do want to stop a little bit beyond the platform here. Now if I just make an application of 20 on the brake cylinder gauge there, we should be stopping in about the right place. Departing from Point Pleasant, the starting speed limit is 40 miles per hour, and we've got just under 2 miles to go to the next stop, which is Manasquan. So now in full power, accelerating towards 40 miles per hour, and then as we get to 40, I think it's just around notch 1 or notch 2, should roughly hold us at that speed. We're now in notch 1 of power. In fact, I'm just going to idle for a moment just to ensure that we don't go above 40 miles per hour along here. Now I'm going back up to notch 1 so that I can more easily judge what's happening to the speed in the various power settings without actually breaking the speed limit. At the start of this double track section, just after the bridge that we've crossed, the speed limit is going up to 60 miles per hour, and we can be sure that the rear of the train has cleared the increase in the speed limit as we enter the next right-hand curve. And also as we enter this curve, we've then got 3/4 of a mile to go to our stop. So at this point I am going to accelerate for a moment, and as we get towards around 45 to 50 miles per hour, and then going to idle the power once again, we do need to apply the brakes for the next stop before we reach the end of this right hand curve. I think it's just before the end. But I must also point out that actually the next stop does not have any clear platforms, so it's actually quite difficult to know exactly where the stopping point is at the next stop. We're now reaching the end of the right hand curve, so I'm now putting on the dynamic braking. Could have probably done that slightly smoother than I did just there. And at this point I'm now going to also apply the air brakes to try and ensure that we are slowing down quick enough, just because I'm very concerned about knowing exactly where the platform is. There is actually a building on the opposite track which marks where the station is, and we need to stop just beyond a crossing which is at the other end of the station area. So I've now released the air braking, and I'm also cutting the dynamic braking to 0. And now you can see there on the left hand side is in fact the platform building, so I need to now brake harder. In fact, I'm not quite sure that we're going to slow down quick enough without going up to 30 on the brake gauge here. Now I'm just going to reduce the braking once again. In fact, I'm doing here what I said you shouldn't do, which is fanning the brakes. I'm probably fanning them a bit too much. So I'm just going to apply the brakes, and we should be able to get to 20, and we have been able to, so this should be stopping us in about the right place. Departing Manasquan, the starting speed limit is 60 miles per hour, and we've got around 2¼ miles to go to the next stop, which is Spring Lake. The first landmark that I'm looking out for out of Manasquan to tell us where we are is actually the next signal. And at the next signal we've then got 1¾ miles to go to our next stop. As you can see, we are now passing the next signal, which means we do now have 1¾ miles to go to Spring Lake. And the next landmark that I'm now looking out for is actually the next signal, which is just over ½ mile from our stop. As we reach 60 miles per hour along here, I'm going to go to notch 3 of power, which should roughly maintain the speed at close to 60. I would just like to say at this point that I can now announce that the next video which I'll be making for the channel, will be on the North London line. I'm not sure which direction to cover it in yet, but I've just recently got the North London line courtesy actually of one of my subscribers, David Hill. So thank you very much for that, David. I'm quite enjoying driving the route, and it'll be great to make a video on it soon. I'd also like to announce that I have now reached 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. I surpassed it at the weekend. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of you who has clicked the subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. I'm very grateful that enough people like my videos to want to click that subscribe button and watch them in the future. So thank you very much for that. So just past the next signal now, indicating half a mile to go. I have now shut off the power to idle, and I'm going to brake just after this underbridge here, which you can see there. So I am now braking for the stop. We're now in full dynamic braking, and I'm now going to also apply the air brakes to 20 on the brake gauge, which I think should be enough to slow us down in time. I'm just going to apply the brakes slightly more, going up to 30, as I don't feel we are quite slowing down quick enough. In fact, I'm still going to go up higher to 40 to ensure that we are slowing down quick enough. At this point I'm now releasing the dynamic braking. I'm also going to release the air brakes, and I'm just going to have to use a light application now to bring us to a stop, to ensure that the brakes haven't bled out and I can still make a brake application. Should have applied the brakes slightly more than I intended there. We do need to stop just before this signal post here. Departing Spring Lake, the starting speed limit is 60 miles per hour, and we've got around 2 miles to go to the next stop, which is Belmar. The next landmark that I'm looking out for along here is once again the next signal, and as we reach the next signal we've then got roughly 1 1/3 miles to go to Belmar station. Just coming up on the next signal now, so we do now have 1 1/3 miles to go, and we're also quickly coming up on 60 miles per hour. So in a moment I'm going to cut the power down towards notch 3, which should roughly hold us at 60. So we're now in notch 3 of power, which is holding us. In fact, we've just gone up to 60 there, so I'm just cutting the power back slightly to ensure that we don't end up breaking the speed limit. The next landmark is the next signal, which is just over half a mile from the stop. It looks like this is the next signal coming up now. So at this point I want to idle the power to allow the train to coast. And I believe I want to apply the brakes coming up in a second at this crossing just here. So I'm now applying the dynamic braking. I'm also going to apply the air brakes up to 20 on the brake gauge, well 25 it seems we're going to be. I can now see the platform coming up, and I'm not sure if we're slowing down quick enough again. So I've just increased the braking towards 40 on the brake gauge, and it looks like we are now slowing down quick enough to stop okay. I'm now going to cut back on the dynamic braking. I'm going to leave the air brakes on for a moment and now release as we've dropped towards 15 miles per hour. I am aiming to stop just before the end of the fence to the left hand side, which is in between the two tracks here. So I'm now just making a light brake application to just over 10 on the brake gauge, increasing up to just over 20, and I think this should be bringing us to a stop at about the right point. Departing Belmar, the starting speed limit is 60 miles per hour, though it is very shortly going down to 40 miles per hour, and at this point we've got 1 2/3 of a mile to go to the next stop, which is Bradley Beach. As we're now approaching 40 miles per hour, I'm now cutting the power back to go between idle and I think it's notch 2 to try and maintain the speed at close to 40 miles per hour. What I'm looking out for next is a signal just before an overbridge, and at the overbridge itself we've then got 3/4 of a mile to go to our stop. So I believe it is going to be this next overbridge coming up, though I can't be certain until we're a bit closer to it. Indeed it is this overbridge here. You can see the signal just coming up on the right hand side. It was obscured by the trees there. So at this point we've now got just over 3/4 of a mile to go. What I'm looking out for next is a signal on the opposite track. And as we reach that signal, we've then got around half a mile to go to Bradley Beach. I'm now looking out for the station, which should be coming up just ahead very shortly. I'm going to try and do this by sight, so I'm going to apply the brakes by sight as we get closer. Just after this second crossing here, just saw there was a previous crossing, so it's 2 crossings quite close together, is where we need to apply the brakes, and I've just seen that the station is actually coming up just here. So we weren't slowing down quite as soon as I probably should have done, and I've had to brake quite hard to bring our speed down quickly. I'm now going to cut off the dynamic braking, and I'm also going to release the air braking and then just reapply it at a much lower setting so that we can come to a more gentle stop. I do need to stop here just beyond the crossing. Departing Bradley Beach, the starting speed limit is 40 miles per hour, and we've got just under a mile to go to the next stop, which is Asbury Park. So what I'm looking out for along here now is the next signal, and as we pass that signal, we've then got around 2/3 of a mile to go to our stop. So we're just coming up on the next signal now. At this point we've got around 2/3 of a mile to go. And I'm going to idle the power just before we reach 40 miles per hour. Again, I'm looking out for the platform which is coming up just ahead, so that I can try and judge the correct point to apply the brakes, and doing this by sight. I can now see the platform coming up, so I'm applying the dynamic braking. I've just put that into the full position now, and in a moment I'm also going to introduce the air braking, which I'm going to do now up to 20 on the brake gauge and hold it there. I'm now going to cut back on the dynamic braking to completely off, and I've just realised that I'm actually slowing down slightly too quick here. So I've just released the brakes completely momentarily until we're closer to the platform, then I'm going to reapply the brakes once again. So you can see the platform is coming up just ahead there. So I could have braked probably another 1/5 of a mile to 1/4 of a mile closer to the station than I actually did. And so now up to 20 on the brake gauge, which should bring our speed down quite nicely. This is a very short platform here, as you can see, so we don't want to enter the platform at a high speed. And if you're driving this yourself, I definitely don't recommend entering the platform at any faster than 20 miles per hour. So I'm aiming to stop just a little bit beyond the platform here. Just reapply the brakes now back up to 20, and we should now be stopping in about the right place. In fact, I'm going to go up slightly higher, as I think we might just be overshooting very slightly. Departing Asbury Park, the starting speed limit is 40 miles per hour, though immediately going down to 25 miles per hour, and we've got around 1.5 miles to go to the next stop, which is Allenhurst. So after departing from Asbury Park, we need to count 6 crossings away from the station before the speed limit goes up. We've just crossed the first crossing, which was immediately after the station itself, and so we're now crossing the second crossing here. And the third crossing. At this point I'm now going to idle the power in a moment to ensure that we don't break the speed limit. That's if the speedometer reaches 25 miles per hour, which it has done now, so the power is now in idle. Here comes the fourth crossing. Here's the fifth, and the final crossing is just coming up, and as soon as we've passed over this crossing we can then accelerate back up towards 40 miles per hour, as the speed limit has now gone back up once again. As we're now approaching 40 miles per hour, I'm just cutting the power back to ensure that we don't break the speed limit, and so the power handle is now in idle. And now as we just dropped to 39, I've just brought it back up to notch 1, which should roughly hold us at this speed. What I'm looking out for now is a siding which is going to come up on the right hand side. As we start passing that track, I am then going to idle the power. And then shortly after that, as we cross a point where that siding actually joins the track that we're currently on, I am then going to start braking for our stop at Allenhurst. You can now see the track of the siding just coming up on the right hand side here, with the buffer stops at the end there. So I'm now going to idle the power at this point, and you can see the point is just coming up ahead where I'm going to start braking. So I've now got the dynamic brakes on, and in a moment I'm also going to introduce the air braking to ensure that we're slowing down quick enough. In fact, we were coming in slightly too quick there, so I've gone as high as 40 on the brake cylinder pressure gauge, which should bring our speed down quite nicely. I have now cut back on the dynamic braking, and I'm now releasing the air brakes to ensure that we don't stop too early before reapplying them up to just over 20 on the brake gauge. We should now be stopping in about the right place. Departing Allenhurst, the starting speed limit is 40 miles per hour, and we've got around 2 miles to go to the next stop, which is Elberon. There are no major landmarks really between here and Elberon to worry about, and what I'm actually looking out for is a heavily super elevated right hand curve, and as we reach the end of that curve we've then got a third of a mile to go to our stop. Once again I'm going to go between idle and notch 1 of power to maintain our speed at close to 40 miles per hour. I would just also like to, at this point, remind you once again that over the next 8 weeks I am now off university, so you can expect to see an increase in the number of videos from me on this channel. However, the primary focus won't necessarily be route learning videos. I'd really like to get some more route and train guides, documentary videos up, and also a couple of tutorials which people keep requesting from me. One tutorial in particular which will go through graphics settings and what each setting does and how you can best adjust them to try and get the best frame rate out of the game. And another tutorial which is particularly requested of me is how to install reskins. Another thing that I'm looking to try and do at some point soon is a US signalling guide, which I think would prove to be very useful and will help to complete the signal guides that I currently have on the channel. So you can expect to see quite a few different videos and quite a bit of variety from me throughout December and January, and of course I am in Hungary from the 10th to the 15th of January, where I'm hoping to get quite a lot of video footage so that I can put together maybe a short 10 to 15 minute documentary video highlighting some of the trains and the locations on the railways around the city of Budapest. I believe it's the next curve which is coming up now, which is the heavily super elevated right hand curve. And so I'm just going to leave the power in notch 1 for now, which seems to be holding us nicely at 39 miles per hour. And as I said, as we reach the end of this curve we've then got a third of a mile to go to our stop. I'm now going to idle the power at this point, ready to start braking. I am going to apply the brakes as soon as I see the station coming up ahead. I now see the station coming up ahead. I'm now in full dynamic braking, and I'm immediately applying the brakes up to 30 on the brake gauge, as this time I want to ensure that I am slowing down quick enough and don't need to make quite such a hard brake application as I have at a couple of stops on this journey. As we get down towards 10 miles per hour, I am then going to release the brakes and just cruise in towards the end of the platform. I would just like to also mention from what I was saying a moment ago that just because I am trying to focus on getting an increase in the variety of the number of videos on the channel doesn't mean that I will be neglecting route learning videos, and you can certainly still expect to see some route learning videos uploaded to the channel over the course of the next couple of months. Should now be stopping in about the right place. Departing Elberon, the starting speed limit has now gone up to 60 miles per hour, and we've got around 2¼ miles to go to our next and final stop, which is Long Branch. Although the speed limit has now gone up to 60 miles per hour, there is a reduction in the speed limit coming up soon down to 50, so there's no point in going up to 60 as we'll have to brake almost immediately for the upcoming 50 speed limit. Upon arrival at Long Branch, bring your head end to a stop short of the signal and with your first 3 coaches on the platform. So we are now approaching 50 miles per hour. At this point I'm now going to completely idle the power, as I'm not going to need power to maintain a speed, as the speed limit will shortly be going down to 25 miles per hour. What I'm looking out for now is a crossing on a left-hand curve, and then shortly after that a signal. Once we reach that signal, we're then 1/4 mile from the upcoming 25 speed limit, and the 25 mile per hour speed limit comes into force at the crossing after the overhead wires start along here. So here's the crossing on the left hand curve. At the next signal I am then going to apply the brakes for the upcoming 25 speed limit. You can see the signal is coming up just here, so I'm now going into dynamic braking to bring our speed down. And you can also see the overhead catenary is just about to start just ahead. So at this point I'm now going to apply the air braking as well to ensure that we do slow down quick enough. It's at this next crossing just coming up here where the speed limit drops to 25 miles per hour, as it's the first crossing after the wires have started properly. So the speed limit has now dropped to 25 miles per hour and will remain at 25 for the duration of the journey now into Long Branch Station. To maintain 25 miles per hour, I just need to go between idle and notch 1 of power, as there's no exact power setting which will hold us at this speed. We're either going to be slightly accelerating or slightly decelerating, depending on the power setting. In fact, it looks like I just went up to notch 2 there, so I've just pulled it back to notch 1 once again. I believe that when stopping here, if we were continuing the journey towards New York, then we would actually need to change power modes here, so that we were then taking electricity from the overhead catenary to continue into New York. I'm just going to leave the power in idle at this point. As you can see, Long Branch Station is coming up just ahead. So I'm just going to use now some light dynamic braking. In fact, it will be light because we're going at a lower speed, so the dynamic brake is of course less effective at this point. It's just going to bring our speed down nicely because I don't want to enter the platform too quickly. I do need to stop just before the signal which you can see ahead, which is what the pop-up was telling us a moment ago. So I'm now just going to gradually tap the brakes to increase the brake pressure there. It's going to release them temporarily and now reapply once again. And we should now be stopping in about the right place. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really do hope that you have enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also please don't forget that you can find me on Facebook for the latest updates, the link of which is in the description of this video. Once again, thank you for watching.